Welcome to the Freedom CEO podcast. It's about becoming the chief decision maker over your life in order to step into a life of freedom. From business, health, wealth, charity, and giving back to just doing life on your own terms. I am your host, Shae Invidiata. I am an award-winning activist, change maker, and a multifaceted impact entrepreneur with over a decade of experience in business, philanthropy, and health and wellness. In this space, I'm going to be bringing you insights, not just from me, but from incredible thought leaders around the globe to help you start making decisions towards living a life of freedom so you can live a life you love. Are you ready, guys? Because we are going all in. Today's episode is part 2 on my thoughts and insights of the human trafficking film, Sound of Freedom. You should totally check out part 1, which is episode 30, where I address some of the controversial questions being raised around this film. I went live on Instagram to provide part 2 of my thoughts, now having seen the film myself, and I wanted to share this with you here on the podcast. Leave a comment or drop any questions, as this will continue to be an ongoing conversation as things arise and come to the surface. Hello, happy Sunday. I thought this would be a really great time to share my thoughts on the film Sound of Freedom. Some of you may have seen, I did a part 1 of this where I introduced myself. My name is Shae Invidiata. I am in business, real estate, but I'm also the founder of a nonprofit organization called Free Them, based out of Canada. And I'm not going to go into too much around like Free Them and what we've done. You can go over to freedom.ca. You can follow us on Instagram. I'm going to be sharing this afterwards, and we'll make Free Them a collaborator so you can follow us. But I did a part 1 to the film, The Sound of Freedom. And I was overseas and out of the country, so I wasn't able to watch the film. And I shared with you then that I was going to come back and share some of my thoughts after I had seen the film. And so I thought today would be very fitting, given it is World Day Against Human Trafficking. And so I want to talk first about context for the film Sound of Freedom. This film is about the story of Tim Ballard, and it's the story of Tim Ballard. And so if I were to do a film on my journey and how I got introduced and involved and realized what was going on in our world around human trafficking, and I shared my journey, the film would be very different than Tim Ballard's. And there's a lot of critique going on right now around the film only showing that this is happening in third world countries and in places like Mexico and the jungle. And that's because this is his story, and it's the part of his journey that he decided to show. So contextually, I think we need to remember that that is what the film is about. It's about the journey and the story of Tim Ballard. And so is there another side of human trafficking? Are there other ways of human trafficking happening in Canada and the United States and around the world? Absolutely. But right now, that is the film is about his story in general. And so one of the things as I kind of went through the film or watched the film, I have to say there was moments in it that were really emotional for me. I think about certain things that I have gone through and learning the dark side and the horrific realities around human trafficking. And again, seeing the children in these positions, you can't help but to feel something. And that's the right reaction. And so throughout the film, I got a little emotional here and there as well. And I have to say it was a really great reminder for me as to why I decided to do something about this, why I decided to start speaking up and asking questions around what was our government doing? What weren't they doing? And for those of you who don't know me, as I said in the beginning, if I made a film around my journey on human trafficking, it would look very different. Mine started in Hawaii. And then I went to Vancouver and British Columbia in Canada, went over to Australia and Sydney, and then came back to Canada. And so the storyline would be around that for me. So it would be a lot more of a Canadian American with also an international focus because I was in Australia. And so for me, it was a really, really great reminder as to why I decided to start speaking up and sharing what I knew. One of the things, I felt at the end of the movie was a bit of a miss, I think, for the film, was as much as my journey is my journey and Tim's is Tim's journey, we cannot forget the victims, the survivors along the way that have been rescued. And there's a really kitsch phrase, if you will, amongst like the charity community, the voice for the voiceless. And it is a term I cannot stand. I believe that each of us have a voice, including all of these victims, and the survivors as well, and that they have been silenced. And I think there's a really big difference there. And part of my heart when I first was in this journey, Freedom wasn't even formed yet. I wasn't even thinking about creating an organization at this point. This was like many years ago, back in like 2003 to 2006. I vowed that I wanted to amplify their voices and make sure that what had been silenced was being heard. And that for me, I wish at the end, anyways, some of the victims that Tim Ballard had rescued, that there would have been an opportunity to share their voices in some way and share their story. There is also a fine line of having survivors come on film and showing their faces. Some of them don't want to do that. There's a whole other element of re-exploitation that can be felt. There's re-traumatization as well, sometimes for a lot of victims, which you have to be very mindful of. But I think there could have been some way to incorporate their voices, their stories of the actual survivors that Tim rescued. So I would have liked to have seen that in there. And, again, it's really important that we are amplifying survivors' voices and their journey and their experiences of what they have gone through. They're also the experts in what is actually taking place in this dark world. So I've kind of laid out a few things I want to just share with you guys. And again, remembering that this is a film and that there is truth behind it. And even though there's a lot of things that are in question, and I still have questioned myself about who's funding the film and why, but it doesn't negate the fact that there's truth here around the realities of human trafficking. But remembering that this is just one way, and it's not the only form. And so children go missing every single year, and every single one of those kids is somebody's daughter, is somebody's son. And so for me, the topic around this always comes back to, if that was your daughter, if that was your son, how far would you be willing to go? And whether it's in Mexico, United States, India, Southeast Asia, this is happening everywhere around the world. And so people say, well, what should this film have been about? And I want to say that no matter who's making a film on human trafficking, it's always going to be heavily critiqued. If I made a film about it, there would be people coming out and saying, I should have done this differently. I didn't do this. I didn't do that. And I think, though, it is an starting conversation to a very difficult, a very dark conversation that needs to be had on what is happening in our world and also at the border in the United States and Canada. And we should expand that conversation. The two most prevalent forms of human trafficking in Canada and the United States are forced labor and sexual exploitation. And there are other forms as well in our countries, but also around the world. You have organ trafficking, you have debt bondage, chattel labor, forced marriage. This is not just one particular type. and many have crossovers where you can see a person who is in forced labor who's also being sexually exploited as well, that it crosses over. But there are many different forms, many different types of trafficking. And so in the film, it's around the drug cartels and in the jungle, crossing the borders in the United States. And that is happening. But there are, as I just shared, there are many different forms. And this is highly sensitive. It's a very disturbing topic, and it's very complex. And there's a lot of moving parts. There's many different tiers of human trafficking. And that's unfortunately not what this film was about. The film was not about showing the diversity, the complex layers around human trafficking. It was to highlight one area, if you will, and Tim's story specifically and how he got involved. So I thought that maybe I would elaborate on that and helping some people understand that what you saw in the film, that is true, that the way in which that's happening or being portrayed in the film is a reality. But there are much more that is going on in the countries around the world, from more amateur, I call it like street level entry gangs and individuals to small groups, all the way up to completely organized crime. And this isn't new to us, right? Like we've all heard of organized crime and mafia. I feel like today now you start talking about higher powers or higher people in higher positions around organized crime, and people just want to dismiss that as a conspiracy, when in fact we all have seen that happening in different forms, different ways around money, fraud, sexual abuse, all kinds. And this has been happening forever. So this is not new. This is not new around 2020. This is not new around this film either. But leveling up to organized crime and then involving powers or powerful people in powerful places amongst politicians, presidents, CEO, corporations, different leaders in these higher up places. And so with that, you have an array of circumstances that can take place around human trafficking. I am actually sitting in Oakville right now, and some of you might be tuning in from Toronto and the GTA. You could be over in Vancouver, you could be in New York. But if you are in a city in Canada, the United States, or wherever you are, human trafficking is taking place not far from where you are currently sitting. Even myself in Oakville right now. When you look at different hotels, skyscrapers, condo buildings, this is happening in major cities all across the world, all across Canada and the United States, from government official even buildings, happening in nail salons, agriculture fields here in Canada as well. There's different nanny agencies for forced labor and sexual exploitation that people end up getting trafficked into. In Canada, or in Toronto, I should say, the GTA, Square One, the malls used to be, and Square One still is really a hub for human trafficking in this area. But there's malls all across Canada where human trafficking is taking place, and the luring and coercion of young girls is happening. When I went to go see this movie, this is totally a real story. Went to go see the film with my mom, and we came out, and it was probably about, we went in to the 6:30 or 7 o'clock show. So we got out around probably 10 o'clock, 10:30. And as you guys know, Sound of Freedom is out and the film Barbie is out. And so this is a classic scenario that predators, traffickers, pimps look for. Parents drive up, drop off their children. Their kid has a cell phone, so therefore they think their child is safe because if they're in danger, they can call. Where I always tell parents, if your child is actually in danger, by the time they realize that, they probably aren't able to reach for their phone, can't get to their phone quick enough, or they don't have their phone in their possession. But this is a very typical story. Kids get dropped off at the movie theater, they go in, they come out, and somebody's been watching them, and they get preyed on. Are the girls taken from the movie theaters? Sometimes, yes, that does happen. But in today, that's usually not what's happening. Usually it's an older man, 18 to 22, 23 that comes and hits on this 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 14-year-old, gets their number, gets their contact, asks for their Instagram handle, their Snapchat handle, whatever it is, to start communicating. And that's the commencement part. This is where it begins. So my mom and I come out of the movie, and there's these two adorable girls. They had to have only been 12 or 13 years old, in their pink shirts, their pink shorts, which were too short. For me, if those were my daughters, they would not be wearing short shorts like that. And of course, they're coming out of the film, they're excited, they're taking selfies. And I'm like looking around and I'm saying to my mom, where are their parents? Like, it's 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, and these 12, 13-year-old looking girls are there just taking selfies. And yes, you can say there's a lot of people there. Like I said, is the van going to pull up and snatch these girls? No, that's not how it's going to happen. I watched for about 10 minutes. I was really looking at the surroundings to try for myself, just to make sure that these girls were okay and that a guy wasn't going to approach them, because that's as simple. That's as simple as it gets. It's as easy as it can be, where an older guy could have approached these girls and been like, you guys look so cute. You just came out of the film. What'd you think of the film? Oh my goodness, I saw it too. We should go out for coffee. We should meet up for lunch, go to the mall. And that's it. That trafficker sees these two girls, and it can be as simple as that. So the movie theaters, it's happening at the movie theaters, at the malls. You drive along any highway. I don't care what highway it is in the world. You can be in Canada, the United States. You can be driving from the East Coast to Montreal, down the 401 to Toronto, across the country. And what do we always see along the highways? Travel lodges, Motel 6s, different Holiday Inns, motels. This is a breeding ground and easy to just transport, because there is a location for traffickers to continue to move their victims around, and a place for them to be able to exploit them and just keep moving. So that is a huge area all across the world, not just Canada and the United States, to happening in, like I said, in swanky hotels, taking place there around conferences like in Davos, at the World Economic Forum, at the Super Bowl, at FIFA, at the World Cup. Wherever you have a major congregation of people, you're going to see an influx of trafficking to meet the demand for people who are wanting to pay. I say pay to rape, because majority of these people, these girls, are minors, paying to rape, but paying for sex. And so you see this around conferences. It's happening. Many of you, if you have never really heard about human trafficking prior to 2020, you might recall it around Super Bowl that about 6 years ago, they started doing awareness ads and campaigns around that time, because they were seeing, and advocates like us with Freedom and other organizations were really putting the pressure on the city host, saying, you've got this influx that is happening in your city and you're not doing anything about it. And it's happening in the schools, private schools and public schools. This is a topic that knows no borders, knows no class of people, race of people, profession of people. So it does not matter if you're in a public school, a private school, if you're a taxi cab driver, school teacher, faith leader, politician, CEO, president, CEOs. Like, it is happening. It is happening by people that you would never expect it to be, amongst leadership. And like I said, professions, class. This is a horrific, horrific secret that is kept all around the world. Back in 2017, I actually did a TEDx talk called The World's 27 Million Darkest Secrets. And today, there's over 40 million people in global slavery. There's 27 at the time when I was speaking in 2017. And again, this begs the question, and we can't be afraid to ask questions. Good questions lead to better answers. They lead to better solutions. And so when we ask the question, why in 2017 were there 27 million people in global slavery? And why today is there over 40 million? If we know better, shouldn't we be doing better? If we know better, shouldn't we have better legislation, better prosecution, better systems, better resources, better safe houses, better rehabilitation for survivors of human trafficking, and prosecuting the demand and putting away pimps, traffickers who are enslaving these girls and young boys? But that's not what's happening. 27 million people in 2017 and over 40 million today. So that's something to think about. I wanted to give you one example here, a real example, because this actually just happened. I think within the last, last year, April of 2022. James Gordon Meek. Some of you might have heard of him. He was a former investigative journalist with ABC News, and he was also formerly an investigator for the U.S. House Homeland Security Committee. And he completely debunked, suppressed, saying that if you heard around the word Pizzagate, that he basically debunked it, saying that it's not true. There's no evidence of it. And more recently, he just pled guilty to child exploitive images charges. So people will say child pornography, and I say those are two words that never go together, because no child chooses that. And the pornography industry has a very choice-based notion around it. And so we need to call it for what it is: child rape images, child exploitive images. And so he actually pled guilty to not just the transportation and possession of that material. He also talked about how I don't even want to say it on here, but you can Google it. I will say it, around sickening child rape materials of minors that he had stored. It also goes further to say that he had videos and images depicting minors and under the age of 12, including infants being raped as well. So I share this because here's a man who is pretty high up there, Homeland Security, on their committee for many years, and working with, the US government, to them being an ABC reporter and debunking and trying to suppress something that people were asking questions about and saying, there's a lot of weird stuff going on here around this word Pizzagate. And he debunked it, and now he's being charged, and he's looking anywhere between 5 to 20 years in jail to serve time for this, which he will probably get a slap on the wrist. So I won't be surprised if he is not serving a very long time, because that's just the way the system works, which is a whole other conversation for another day. But this is just one example of people who are in higher places where this is taking place all the time. You can Google different senators with sexual charges who have been in sex tape scandals, human trafficking. It is foolish for us to not acknowledge that reality. And it is foolish for us to say that just cannot be happening. We live in a world where good and evil exists. We are not in a utopia. We are not in a dream. This is the reality of the world. There is good and there is evil. And no matter how, like I said, no matter what class, no matter what race, no matter what your societal rank is for your wealth, this is taking place amongst so many different groups of people and by so many groups of people. And we really need to acknowledge that. This is my kind of question for this film. And, we tell the world about human trafficking, but if we're hiding or telling only one part of like the drug cartels, many of us would say, well, yeah, that's obvious. But if we're hiding and concealing others that are aiding, organizing it, controlling it, and also using it, how are we ever going to stop it? How are we actually going to save and rescue the children and not have this be a hamster wheel problem where we get enraged, we do a little event, you see something, you participate in something, and then, you donate, and then you feel like you're doing your part. And yet, is this just like a feel-good motion? Or are we really actually making change in our world? And so that, for me, is my question with this film for Tim Ballard, around how you had Carlos Slim fund this film. Because he's not one of the guys that is on the good side and is fighting this fight. He profits from the bad side and all kinds of other things that are complementary, overlapping to this topic. But as I said in my first live with you guys, we need to not be afraid. We need to be empowered. And the more that you start seeing what is going on, you can make better decisions to protect your children, to be aware of what to look for. And this is not to become, like I said, afraid. It is to become empowered. And we need to ask questions. We need to raise our voices. And today, like I said, it's World Day Against Human Trafficking. And the irony of this is that it is deemed by the United Nations globally. And similar to what I just mentioned about the Sound of Freedom, exposing one area around human trafficking and bringing light to that, there is the irony of actually like who supported and funded the film. It is no different than even today on World Day Against Human Trafficking, deemed by the United Nations. Years and years and years ago, myself, I had a very different viewpoint on what the United Nations was, what it stood for. I still think there is good being done in the United Nations, but right now we are looking at governing global bodies like the WHO, like the UN, introducing different suggestive policies for health practitioners and educational teachers around the world on standards for sexual education. We are starting to move into a world where they are trying to make it acceptable that early childhood masturbation, expressing and understanding your body as a young child, being curious regarding their own bodies, but then also others. We are normalizing the sexualization of children in our society, and this is coming from the top down. When I look at what is going on right now around gender reassignment, my heart literally shatters for these children, breaks. My heart has been so heavy for so long on this. A child cannot vote. A child cannot go and buy cigarettes. A child cannot make a decision to get a tattoo. And yet we are allowing, well, not we, I certainly am not, I'm not a part of it at all, kids to make detrimental, horrific, traumatizing decisions that are irreversible. And even if, you start seeing some of these other people in their late 20s that are coming out saying that they're trying to transition back to their birth gender. And it is just, you will never be the same. And there is a lineage of trauma that comes with that. And I look at this, how it intertwines around human trafficking, because he who controls and gains the mind of the youth owns the future. Some of you guys might have heard me say this quote before. If you know who it is, you can put it in the comments. I would love to know if you know. But the person who says this or said this is Hitler. And when you really let that sink in, he who gains the mind of the youth owns the future. That is so scary. And it's very true. And you look at what's happening right now around confusing children, introducing topics that we should never be discussing with children until they are of an older age, later in high school, becoming a young adult, and having these conversations around sexuality and your body, but doing it at so young. The sexualization of children is what is going to continue to feed the industry around human trafficking. And for me, it is a very clear, weave, if you will. And right now it looks separate because we've been slowly integrating piece by piece. And some people can't see the bigger picture and can't see the bigger puzzle. For me, this all is going to end up leading to normalizing pedophilia, normalizing adults being able to sexually abuse and rape children. And there's going to come a time where they're going to say that the child is consenting to that. Because if the child can consent to changing their gender, then a child can certainly consent to having rape relations, is what I will call it, with an adult. That's inconceivable. Like, it is literally inconceivable. But we, right now in society, we're watching how society is being convinced and brainwashed that this is actually accepted, that children should be engaging in sexual acts with adults and older people. So I know I've kind of gone off on a little tangent. I'm going to do, I think, eventually a whole other episode on just this topic and the gateway that's happening. But what I really want you guys to take away from today is the truth that's being shown on this film, and understanding that there is more around human trafficking. I hope that what I shared brings some of that light. Go do your own research. You can go to freedom.ca. We got tons of stuff on there that will share with you more about human trafficking and what is happening in a city near you. And we need to not be afraid to do our own research, but that too. But I was going to say, we really need to be afraid to not ask questions. We need to ask, why is this happening? Why is this happening to children? Why is this happening now? Never before in history has something like this taken place amongst our children. Why do we not have governing bodies wanting to protect the innocent and protect our young ones? There are answers behind those questions, and I encourage you guys today on World Day Against Human Trafficking, find 30 minutes, find an hour, do your own research. And I said this the last time. I want to say this again because I feel that there's a lot of heaviness in all of this, as I shared. Like, my heart has shattered many times over. We have to continue to fight. We have to continue to be love. We have to continue to speak truth. And one of my favorite quotes in the world is that all that it takes for evil to triumph is for good men, and I insert women, to do nothing. And so if we do nothing, they win. And each of us have the power. Each of us have the ability to do something. Doesn't mean you have to start an organization. Doesn't mean you need to start and create a huge event. But we can all do something small by having these hard conversations, asking good questions, doing our own research, becoming educated, which leads to empowerment. And I want to lead you with this, that what man intends for evil, God is able to use for good. I look at these past 2 years, and this is really, even I've had these conversations with like my mom and other people being like, I can't believe the world we're living in. And the reality is, this has been going on for such a long time. We just all have not realized it, or to the extent to which it's happening. I do think things are progressively, in some ways, getting worse, and that's coming to the surface. But we have lived for so long not realizing the atrocities that are actually taking place in our own backyards. And it's time. It's time for us to acknowledge it. It's time for us to say no more. It's time for us to not accept it. And it's time for us to start fighting back bigger. So I leave that with you guys. Know that in the end, good always wins and the truth always comes out. I always say, follow the money. It leads to the truth. And I hope that today you have a wonderful Sunday, and let's just keep up the fight. Go be love and light. And thanks for all of you guys who tuned in. I'm going to share this as well, so anybody you know that this could help them and educate them or bring some awareness, feel free to share it. Okay, talk to you guys soon. Thanks for tuning into the Freedom CEO podcast. If you got value out of today's show, I would love for you to leave a review, as it will help my show reach other people as well. You know what to do. Download this episode, click the like and subscribe button. If you feel like spreading more love, hop over to Instagram and share today's show in your stories. Remember to tag Shae Invidiata and the Freedom CEO. My DMs are always open, so drop me a line. I'd love to connect. Until next time, keep owning your decisions to live a life of freedom. Live a life you love.